I want to turn now to one of the aspects of our exploration of the non-human intelligences with which we are now grappling on our planet. We've dealt with the trauma of experiencers, often through the abduction or whatever experience they have at the hands of the extraterrestrials. We've talked about the trauma that has been caused by people who report their experiences and then are received by ostracism, ridicule, sometimes persecution. People are fired, people are diminished. So there's a lot of trauma that is beginning to emerge as disclosure begins to take place. Things hidden are now surfacing. And this is something that the New Paradigm Institute is very much interested in. We want to deepen now our exploration of this, to look at what's happening in the United Kingdom around the mental health effects and therapeutic approaches that can be observed and taken for people who feel traumatized by their experience in one way or another. So I'd like to introduce someone that I've recently gotten to know, John Priestland, who's a physicist and a technologist, who's also been involved in the British civil service and has been working with the government for many, many years and has produced a white paper for the Parliament and the government on the mental health phenomenon associated with ET experiences. And he's a colleague now, and we're working together on a number of fronts. So, John, I want to welcome you from London, and please tell us a little bit more about your background, and then present your white paper, and then I'll circle back and we'll dialogue for the balance of the time.
Thank you, Jim. Thank you, everybody, for having me with you. It's great to be part of your show and your program. My presentation can be summarized in perhaps 6 words, which is people matter and our health matters. And I'm going to start by sharing a bit about who I am and how uNHIdden came into existence, and then cover why the health dynamics of UAPs, or exceptional experiences, as we're calling them within uNHIdden, why that's an underrepresented part of the whole UAP narrative. And I hope it's something that you'll want to champion and do something about at the end of our time together. So as Jim says, I'm a skeptical physicist. I spent the first part of my career working for the UK Civil Service. I wrote 3 white papers when I was at the Cabinet Office, and a white paper in a strict literal sense is a statement of government policy. So it sets out what the government intends to do. The white paper goes before Parliament, and I'll tell you what's led us to write our white paper. Not that it's an official government document, but we wish it were, and we're trying hard with a little bit of work and help with the New Paradigm Institute to get it into the hands of the right people, decision makers and others within UK government circles. But as a skeptical physicist, I'm brought up to believe the things that nice physics boys are supposed to believe and disregard the things that we're not supposed to believe. So we're not supposed to believe in ley lines and crystals and astrology, and we're not supposed to believe in UFOs. So 3.5 years ago, I would have been very dismissive of this subject. But it was my brother-in-law, I blame him for this. He came round one day, he's a physicist too, and he said, John, have you seen these UAPs? And they're buzzing these nuclear sites. I said, hold on a minute, what do you mean? So these documentaries, there are these UAPs, UFOs, and they have a propensity to be seen and visualized around nuclear facilities. And I'm a little interested in the nuclear sector. I do a bit of work in that sector. So it set me thinking, it set me researching. And I enjoyed Robert Hastings' excellent book, UFO and Nukes. I enjoyed the wonderful James Fox film, The Phenomenon. And I started to think, well, hold on a minute. If this is Chinese lanterns or ball lightning or a passive phenomenon like that, how come they know where the nuclear facilities are? Why are they going to the nuclear facilities and not pharmaceutical facilities or oil and gas processing? Maybe there's something on the nuclear site. Maybe it's the critical fissile material. Maybe it's they're picking up on the gamma rays. But no, we shield our nuclear sites really well. And what you start to realize is the characteristics of UFOs, UAPs, and nuclear sites has a sense of intelligence. And that was my entry point into the rabbit hole that many of you watching this podcast will know and have gone down yourself. What if? You do more research, you do more reading. And at that point, the thing that I wanted more than anything was to talk to other people about it and share what I was finding legitimately based on data as a good physicist. But you know what, and you know what I'm going to say, nobody would talk to me. They would laugh, they would scoff, they would look at me and give me that look that many of you will know when you've tried to talk about UAPs. That sort of look, John, didn't realize you were one of those sorts. Don't bring that round here. I think you've gone a bit funny. And that's wrong. That is wrong. Good physics boys are also brought up to believe that we should follow the data. And there have been iconic moments in physics history where new data has led physics into a completely different direction. So what we're talking about here is we're talking about stigma. We're talking about the stigma that exists around talking around UAPs. And we're also talking about shame. Stigma is what society does and what society regards as acceptable. So there are things with good reason that are not considered good things for people to do. Society judges that stigma. Shame is something internal, and those two are linked together. I felt shame because people were showing me that what I was doing was, in their view, wrong by trying to talk about UAPs. And at that point, I realized that stigma and shame were associated with another part of what I was doing in my life, which is I work in construction. And there's a wonderful charity in construction called Mates in Mind. And it works on the proposition that whilst over the last 20 or 30 years, we've made enormous progress in health and safety on construction sites in terms of workplace accidents, we've gone backwards in terms of mental health and suicides and the dynamics of that sort of very sad health and safety dynamic on construction sites. So Mates in Mind is a charity that pushes back on the stigma and shame that people working in construction have, often tough people working away from home, the stigma and shame about talking about their feelings and talking about their mental health, talking about depression. And simply by starting to making it easier to have conversations around those topics, it's transformational in terms of those construction workers' health and well-being, and it's bringing down suicide rates and the rates of people harming themselves. Very simple. It works on the basis you encourage people. If Gary's late for site on Monday, late for site on Tuesday, you ask him, hey, Gary, how are you? How are you feeling? Gary will say, well, I'm fine. No, listen, Gary, how are you really? And you open up a conversation and you make it okay to talk about something that people find difficult. So the very starting point of uNHIdden was wherever we find stigma, where that stigma is inappropriate and unhelpful, first of all, it can cause damage and harm. And I'll tell you a bit more around how people are damaged and harmed by that, much more than I was. But secondly, we can do something about it by just making it easier to have conversations around a particular topic. So my starting point expectation for uNHIdden was pretty basic. We can help some people have slightly better conversations around UAPs, then that will be a result. That will be a benefit. Some people will be less anxious and less stressed than I was within that time. And it has been my absolute pleasure and privilege over the past year and a half to have some amazing conversations around UAPs, to be talking to some experiences. I feel enormously blessed that they've enriched my life by telling me some of the things that they've seen. But I'm still somebody who probably has a challenge talking to more than about 10% of the people I know about UAPs. You still get that sense of stigma and that sense of shame. And we're trying to push on with that. Around 6 weeks ago, uNHIdden launched a campaign. We call it #ChatUAP. to try and encourage people to start conversations around UAPs and to share the best practice and some of the things that didn't work with other people who are a part of the movement, a part of the mission as well. There are times when it's better and more likely to be a successful conversation, times not to try. There are people who are better to talk about the science. There are people who are better to talk to about the health side of things. So that's the starting point of uNHIdden. And what it makes you realise is that the whole question of mental health, well-being and health generally is considerably unrepresented in the UAP debate and discussion. And my sense of the landscape coming into this and setting up uNHIdden was that there were a group of people over here who are all about disclosure. What do we want? Disclosure. When do we want it? Now. Show me the body, show me the craft. There was a group of people over here on the other side of the landscape who go, well, it's all a bit more complicated than that. It's all about the nature of reality. It's about consciousness, and we're going to study that. So group over here, disclosure, group over here, reality and consciousness. And this great big white space in the middle, which was all about people. And I have a contention that it may well be that the interactions we have human to human around disclosure are going to be at least as important as any interactions that we might have human to NHI. And I don't think we're doing a particularly good job at the moment with our human to human interactions. I think the messages are confused. We've got a lack of a coherent, trusted narrative from governments and the media. That leads to anxiety, and that leads to poorer mental health. You may have picked up a phrase during the COVID outbreak that came to prominence around doom scrolling, people scrolling incessantly through their phones looking for more information. There are people who are doom scrolling around UAPs, and some of the information that's coming out is shocking and difficult to process. Representative Luna being asked live on Fox News and CNN after the ICIG hearing in January about interdimensionals. I just imagined an 8-year-old child watching that with her mother and asking, Mummy, what's an interdimensional? Representative Burlinson talking on Askapol, Matt Laslow's show about they kind of phase in and out of existence. There is a narrative here which rightly produces anxiety in a number of people, and that is unhelpful. It leads to poor mental health. And we are not doing a great job in terms of planning for people on the other side of any possible disclosure around ontological shock. Who within the population might be most affected? How can we plan and help as many people as possible if disclosure is a process to help as many people as possible to go from this side of the chasm to this side of the chasm, able to keep calm and carry on? Where is the research? Where is the support? Where is the analysis as to who's going to be most affected? Is it going to be by demographics or by personality type? So what uNHIdden is doing in part is trying to shift the agenda purely from the military and security side and the scientific side to the health agenda and the people agenda. And we think these are very legitimate topics to be asking our elected representatives and senior public servants about, but strangely, they don't seem to feature. And when you look at other topics which have had a sense of newness and a sense of scientific inquiry, for example, when we came to address the challenge of the ozone layer in the 80s and 90s, we didn't just think, is there a military threat and what's the science? We were very, very front and center around what are the health implications for people. Similarly, for genetically modified crops, the health implications for people are front and center. And we don't think that those questions are being asked. Now, our particular focus is around mental health. There are other aspects of health to do with UAPs, to do with anomalous health incidents, which are much more sort of physical health. So we're focusing much more on the mental health side. And it is absolutely clear that there is considerable stress caused to people who are pathologized, in the words of Professor Thomas Rabeyron from the University of Lorraine. And he's quite an inspiration for uNHIdden. He coined the phrase exceptional experiences. And he defined an exceptional experience as it's usually a rare, spontaneous or provoked experience involving, from the subject's point of view, a non-ordinary interaction with his or her environment It often generates intense emotions, both positive and negative, stemming from its unusual or strange nature. And you will notice from that definition, it doesn't refer to UAPs, nor is it prescriptive in quite what that experience is. It is a strange, spontaneous, provoked experience. So it could include poltergeists, ghosts, other things like that. And that's important because what that's doing is it's offering a non-judgmental environment into which the person who's had the experience can come and have the conversation and the consultation with a psychologist or therapist. And what Thomas Rebeyron has done in setting up a marvelous organization in France, whose full name is the Centre d'Information, de Recherche et de Consultation sur les Expériences Exceptionnelles, or CIRCE, is he's created a consultation environment based on that non-judgmental approach. And that team is seeing about 95 patients a year. And so we've taken the term exceptional experiences as the way in which we want to take what uNHIdden is doing. And we add to that disclosure to create our environment. So as Jim says, what we did about 10 days ago, I'm going to share my screen, is we published a white paper. I mentioned at the beginning what a white paper is. We would love to get this into the hands of MPs and others in the UK, love to get this into the hands of Congress, men and women in the US. The impact of exceptional experiences and disclosure on mental health and well-being. And I'll leave that image on the screen for a little while. And I do recommend you take a little time to go and have a look at our microsite. There's a short video from me setting out what it's all about. The white paper is 44 pages long. It has 91 references. I hope we could teach the ARO historic report a thing or two about good referencing. So it's all underpinned by academic and other references. And we make 5 recommendations, and these are framed to the UK government, but they apply broadly equally well to US and overseas governments. And I'm going to put the recommendations up on the screen and talk through them, not word for word, but in a general sense, and you'll get the sweep. So the first thing is we need the UK government to acknowledge that UAPs are real. It was a breakthrough moment for the world, really, when in 2021, the Office of the Director of National Intelligence produced a preliminary report that said UAPs are real physical objects and they pose a safety of flight risk. Nothing in that report around health, interesting, one to challenge and one to ask some more questions about. But the UK government does not accept that. If you ask the UK government anything about UAPs, it comes with a standard line that says, in more than 50 years, the Ministry of Defence has found no military threat from UAPs, extraterrestrials, UFOs. That wasn't the question. We want to ask them the question, are there any health implications? We've not got them to answer that question, and we think they should. And the reason why that's so important as part of recommendation number 1 is unless you acknowledge that exceptional experiences and UAPs exist, it's very hard for those people who have experienced them to get the care and support they need. Something doesn't exist, then why should any care and support be needed? So we need that acknowledgement first and foremost. Secondly, it won't be for uNHIdden to provide that advice and support. It will be for NHS and professional bodies. So we need more guidance and help for those professionals to be able to consult effectively on exceptional experiences. Now, we work closely with a wonderful US body called UAP Med, and one of the dynamics at play here is the Diagnostic Statistics Manual, DSM-5, is going to come out with its new revision, DSM-6, in 2025. It would be transformational if we could get exceptional experiences as a category in that manual, because that's what the clinical practitioners in the US use, and there needs to be something in there if somebody on a health insurance program is going to get cover and it's going to be paid for. So we need more guidance for professional people, professionals in the space. We need more credible information to prevent that doom scrolling and to provide more of a trusted narrative. That's for government, but also the media to play their part. We need more research on what the dynamics of disclosure might be the psychosocial aspects, the more vulnerable groups, communities, and what sort of help might be beneficial. This can't be done on a wing and a prayer and belief. We need research to sit behind the design of a disclosure program. And it's interesting, if you go to the Carl Nell program shown at Sol, those 4 streams of activity, we have a government stream, we have a business stream, we have a humanities stream, and we have one other stream, a natural sciences stream. We don't have a medical and a people stream. The closest we have to a doctor in the Carl Nell program is we have a biologist within the national sciences. Why are the medics and doctors not front and center? Why are the psychologists not helping craft the disclosure programs? I don't know. And then the 5th one here is we need a plan that brings together multiple branches of government. You've got 18 different branches of the intelligence service. It's very fragmented, similarly in the UK, and community groups as a single open shared endeavour and in a way that builds trust. And the reason why it's so important to have doctors involved is a couple-fold. First of all, when you look at a recent survey, an Ipsos Mori survey in 2021, the most trusted profession on the face of the planet is doctors. They come as the most trusted people time and time again. More trusted, I would hazard, than Department of Defence, press officers and others. Don't know where they feature, but doctors are exceedingly trusted. And one of the reasons why doctors are so trusted is that they are exceedingly good at disclosure. Why do I say that? Because every time there is a negative test result, a cancer diagnosis, the doctor has to do a form of disclosure. And the medical ethics and the principles of autonomy and patient-centric diagnosis, putting the patient first, means if you get 100 doctors in a room, 100 out of 100 will agree on the need to disclose. The family might come along and say, please don't tell Uncle Jim he's got cancer, he's very old, it will upset him. The doctors agree that the duty of candor to the patient means they need to disclose. And that's one of the reasons why they're so trusted. It would be great if we had some of that medical ethics thinking in government circles. But there are 2 other reasons why doctors are really good at disclosure. The first of all is they put a lot of time and attention, training and care into how they break the news. They don't just send a text on a Friday afternoon. They bring the patient in, they create the environment, they put the news across in the most patient-centric, caring and supportive for outcomes way. And then there's a big support program, psychological, physiological, pharmaceutical care. Those steps that doctors do day in, day out, applied to a disclosure process, would be really a real revelation in terms of building trust. And one of the things we might find most difficult about disclosure is the erosion of that trust. And it's the same organizations that may be telling us that there's a plan for a post-disclosure world who've been withholding stuff from us for the last 50, 70, 80 years. That's not a good mix. And at the heart of uNHIdden, we have a medical advisory board. This isn't something we can do in anything other than a completely professional way. So we have a fellow of the Royal College of Physicians. We have a general practitioner, which is the entry point into the healthcare system in the UK. We have a clinical psychiatrist. We have a practicing clinical psychologist. These are eminent professionals who are making sure everything we do is compliant with medical ethics, good patient outcomes, and best medical guidance. So that is what we're all about. We're not doing individual referrals. We're not doing consultations yet. That's something we hope to do in the future. That will require funding. It will also require some of the guidance to be in place. But I come back to my summary at the beginning, which is my 6-word summary of what I'm going to say, is that people matter and our health matters. And I hope I've shown you in what I've been saying and in your access to the white paper that the questions we ask and the way we hold government to account around the health aspects of UAPs is undercooked. It's underrepresented. There's more we need to do to ask the questions, not just of the Department of Defence and the intelligence communities, but of the Chief Medical Advisor and the others in the healthcare world. What are the health implications of UAPs? Mental health, physical health, and otherwise. There ought to be some answers because we matter, people matter, and our health matters. And at that point, Jim, I'll hand back to you.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, let's unpack a few of these things. First, John, tell us a little bit more about the current state of play in the British government. And I'm thinking in relation and contrast to what's happening in the United States, where there have been whistleblowers, Lou Elizondo, David Grush, to name just a few. There's been legislation, even though stripped down, still passed last December. So there's a creaky momentum toward disclosure. What's the state of play in the UK? Is there any similar momentum, or are we more or less sort of dead in the water with regards to the whole issue?
We have almost nothing. And we look across the pond at what you've got with your House hearings, with the NDAA 24, and with the great work that you're doing, you, Danny, are doing, Jim, with the New Paradigm Institute. Well, I look across with huge amounts of envy and respect, because we don't have that here. And I think there's a few reasons for that. The first is we have a huge amount of stigma and shame going on. So people don't ask the questions, and MPs and others are terrified to be thought of as saying something strange and being ridiculed for it. What that means is there's very little opposition to the conventional dynamic, which, as I say, is a line to take from the Ministry of Defence, which is in more than 50 years, no military threat, which is just not an answer. It's not a good answer to any question, let alone the sorts of questions we want to ask. I have some sympathy for my former colleagues in the civil service. It is easy to continue with the existing line to take. There's a sort of why change. There is a considerable amount of fear, I am sure, though I don't know for certain, but I'm pretty sure that we don't want to do anything in this country that affects our relationship with the US and our relationship through the Five Eyes. And so the sort of phrase is, we need to wait until the Americans get this over the line and then something can happen. The one ray of light in terms of things that are happening was that we had a select committee hearing. So our select committee hearings are a little bit like your House hearings, and government ministers are held to account. So we have a Secretary of State for Science, Innovation and Technology, a lady called Michelle Donnellan, and we have a select committee on science, innovation and technology. And on the 13th of December last year, one of our MPs, Stephen Metcalfe, quite bravely asked, first of all, whether there were any plans to have hearings in the UK, like the House hearings where Grush, Fravor and Graves were given their questioning. And Michelle Donnellan announced, no, there are no plans for hearings in the UK, shame. But then the question was, is there any planning going on in the UK for disclosure? And a lady called Sarah Munby, who is the permanent secretary, which means the most senior official in Michelle Donnellan's department, she said there is a small team in her department that is planning for disclosure. Oh. Now, the likelihood is, before we get overly excited, the likelihood is that that's about disclosure for the existence of a biosignature. There is some mood music in the UK, and we're quite good at astronomy, and we've got some great astrophysicists doing some great work. There is a sense in which disclosure might equate to a biosignature of something on a distant planet, exoplanet, thousands of light years away. Nevertheless, that is something we're following up on, and it is the first ray of light for quite a number of years that someone within government, and not in a defence or intelligence world, is actually giving a little bit of thought to this. So I hope that is going to start to fan the flames of an awareness here in the UK around disclosure.
And which department is that little small group in again?
So that is the Department for Science, Innovation and Technology.
Oh, so it's coming out of sort of the scientific sector of the government.
That's coming out of the scientific sector, which makes me think that it's to do with the biosignatures rather than something more front and center to disclosure, as you and I would know it, Jim. But that's taken a long time coming, and it's not well known. But in January 2010, the Royal Society, which is our preeminent scientific body, arguably the most preeminent scientific body in the world, held a 2-day round table on the topic of how the existence of extraterrestrial life would be disclosed. And in February of the next year, so this is February 2011, an academic paper came out as part of the Royal Society publication, so Annals of the Royal Society, very, very prestigious, by two academics, Dominic and Zarnecki. And there's a sentence in there that I'll read out to you. So this is 2011, and it said, if extraterrestrial life happens to be detected, a coordinated response that takes account of all the related sensitivities should already be in place, 2011. So where's the plan in the UK? Is there a plan in the US? Is that Carl Nell's plan? That was what the Royal Society said in 2011. And I think we've got a bit of catching up to do, haven't we?
Yes. Well, it's interesting to note that the Vatican in 2009 issued a similar statement, more religiously crafted, obviously, but saying that this is a very serious issue, needs to be taken seriously. And we're not talking just about some cellular organism on a far-off planet, but advanced civilizations potentially here on planet Earth. And then it kind of died back down. And then 2017 with Lou Elizondo resigning from the Pentagon and going to the New York Times, then somehow in the United States, disclosure hit a certain critical mass. And then the rest, as they say, is history, not dramatic in the sense of anything full, but certainly a rising and incrementally building process to disclosure. So where you are, you're trying to put together the little bit of crumbs on the floor to see how things could be brought together. And then
there's an idea I might interject with, which sort of hit me front and center about 3 weeks ago, which links some of the things to do with mental health, stigma, and shame with the wider agenda of disclosure. And there are probably people watching the show today who are thinking it's all very well, but what's it got to do with disclosure? And I was listening to Liminal Frames, one of my favorite shows. This was Liminal Frames 52 on Sunday, the 7th of April. And Nathan was running through different categories of disclosure. And he mentioned a concept which he described as distributed controlled disclosure. And this, he said, and I'm quoting a little bit, this would be a non-government-led type of disclosure with a wide level of recognition and admission that we are not alone and that it is happening almost at a grassroots level across all of society. And he likened this to a village next to a wood. And if people go into the wood and they see grizzly bears in there and they come out and they say to their fellow villagers, there's bears in the wood. If those people who come out of the woods are treated with stigma and rejected, oh, don't be so stupid, there's no such thing as bears, you're lying, that's not true, then we don't get a recognition that there are bears in the wood. But if people come out of the wood and they say there's bears in the wood, and that happens time and again, and people are listened to and conversations happen, then over time it becomes an accepted fact that there are bears in the wood. There doesn't need to be an announcement from the mayor of the village. So I was really interested by this idea of distributed controlled disclosure, because it doesn't require the government to do anything. What it requires us to do is to have the conversations, listen to the people who have had experiences, give them credence and credibility, and over time, the fact that they are seeing things will become part of the way we see the world. Distributed controlled disclosure works when you drive back stigma and shame and you encourage better conversations.
Well, let's dive into that domain, because I think that's the heart of the matter, certainly for you. Now, what would be the general polling on how many people in the UK say either believe in UAP or they've had some experience? Is it a majority? I know in the United States, it's about 2/3 of the public acknowledge the existence of UFOs and or have had some kind of experience or know people who have. Is that a similar statistic in the UK? Do you know?
I think the polling is pretty consistent across the world. The figure for the proportion of people in the UK who say they've seen a UAP goes back to a 2019 YouGov study, and it says 7%. And the average across the whole of Europe is 6.5%, averaging the different polls, which gets you to the grand total across Europe of 29 million people who say they've seen a UAP. And while 7% is a small statistic, 29 million people is a heck of a lot of people who've seen something. Some of those things have physiological, psychological effects. Some of those are correlated with radar. I don't know the number of people who would say they believed, but that is a chunky figure and a very consistent figure.
Yeah. And so has there been research done on the people in, say, Britain, where you're mostly focused, but I imagine it would be similar in Europe, as to how many of these people feel in some way traumatized by either the experience or the way they're treated by society? Back to the bear in the woods effect. Do we have data on how many people are feeling traumatized?
I don't think we've got statistics, but the white for in terms of numbers or percentages, but the white paper makes clear that there is a body of evidence that people are traumatized. Thomas Rebeyron talks about, I think I mentioned this earlier, the pathologization of the exceptional experience. When people come into contact with the health system, they're first of all potentially traumatized by the experience that they've had, and then they're traumatized by the rejection by their friends and family, and potentially traumatized again by the fact that the medical system, if it wants to engage with them at all, is potentially going to label them as having a mental illness. And we have to draw a big distinction between mental health and mental illness. And most people who have a frightening experience, an exceptional experience, are no more mentally ill than somebody who might see a traumatic road traffic accident. But the difference is, if you come back and you tell your friends and family you had that road traffic accident experience, they don't tell you you're a liar, you've made that up. They say, oh, that's terrible, tell me more about it. Do you want to go for a beer? That sort of thing. We come together for many traumatizing experiences, but somehow, somewhere, for UAPs, we come apart, we disregard, we reject, we don't put our arms around each other and come together because of stigma. And that's why it's so important we fight against that. So the white paper talks about the damage that is inflicted on people through the inability to have that sort of comforting environment of their friends and family being rejected at that level, and then potentially not being able to access the medical system. So many people will not go and seek any sort of help if they think they need it, because they're worried about being labelled as having a mental illness, and they have to hide it from their doctor and probably hide it from their friends and family, and that's not good for them.
Yeah, well, and this brings up the research of John Mack back in the 1990s at Harvard Medical School, where the Pentagon retained him to interview the people claiming UFO experiences, and the Pentagon wanted to identify them as mentally ill. And his reporting as a psychiatrist of some note was that none of them were mentally ill. They had trauma because of the way they were treated. But this distinction that you're making between mental health and mental illness is a fundamentally important one. And the attempt on the part of the government, certainly in the United States, to pathologize people who've been reporting has been a major reason why the trauma has been initiated.
I couldn't agree more, and you pronounce that word much better than I do. And the starting point for conventional psychology in this space is that the experience cannot be real. The experience must be explained by false memories, sleep paralysis, psychosis, or schizophrenia. And that's why the non-judgmental approach that I mentioned earlier of Professor Thomas Ribeiro and Cersei is so important, but it seems so obvious. The counsellor should not go into the consultation with the patient with a fixed, firm view as to what's happened. The counsellor should be open-minded and be there for the benefit of the patient. And I'd quite like to have a conversation with some of these psychologists who have this conventional view. Okay, so let's go to the 2004 Nimitz incident. We're fortunate enough to have Alex Dietrich, the wonderful Alex Dietrich, as one of our ambassadors for uNHIdden. But let's ask retired Commander Fravor or retired Lieutenant Commander Dietrich, when it comes to that experience, all the radar telemetry, all the visual telemetry and what they saw. So which was it? Was it sleep paralysis? Was it false memories? Was it psychosis? Or was it schizophrenia? Because those seem to be the four options that the conventional psychologists ascribe to this. And then let's come back to the more, if you like, day-to-day experience that people have, which they then go and seek advice. If we regard the Dietrich and Fravor experience as corroborated because there's all the telemetry and the radar data, maybe we just might open the door ajar a little bit to the idea that some of the experiences of people who see orbs or people who see objects in the sky that they can't explain might be a little bit more real, at least to the point of being open-minded and not closing the door completely and delegitimizing that experience. Patient-centric surely means coping and dealing with the needs of the patient and treating them in the round.
Yeah, exactly. Well, let's turn then to the next question in terms of the 5 points, because obviously, you're starting sort of from zero. You have 5 major priorities. You've got the healthcare system and the prevailing kind of it doesn't exist mentality, and therefore we need to treat you. Where do you start? How is uNHIdden beginning to activate the discussion in Britain? Because you're really starting from zero. So
I think it works.
Your immediate priorities as a coalition, as an organization?
So it works at 2 levels, sort of both ends of the telescope. The big picture is trying to move the dial with government and health service providers. With 29 million people across Europe who've seen UAPs, that potentially is a significant counselling healthcare endeavour. That's not something that a small charity can do. The first step on that journey is to get some recognition that there is a thing called UAPs, and therefore there is something where people might need care and support. So that is the big picture. That's a question of advocacy. Yeah. And it's a common goal, I think, with the US, because I'm encouraging in this conversation people who are listening to think, well, maybe we should do more to elevate health and mental health in the UAP topic and hold some of the health providers to account within government circles. So that's across Atlantic, a sort of a universal endeavour to put health front and centre of the UAP topic, put people front and centre. And then I think we have to work at the other end, which is around care and support for people. And that works at Better Conversations. So promoting our Chat UAP campaign. If everybody in this programme today goes and tries and has 2 conversations that they wouldn't otherwise have with people around UAPs, maybe they'll go well, maybe they won't go well. But the one surefire way not to move forward is not to try. And if you are doing this on your own, just as a singleton, then that feels pretty lonely. If we're doing this as a movement, Chat UAP, if that's a movement, and we can share our successes and cheer those, but also share our challenges and learn from them, we don't feel so alone. So doing Chat UAP as a movement is really important. And then we have to get in from a patient care point of view to the practitioners. We have to start to produce some guidance, make it easier for the consultation. So we're trying to bring the non-judgmental approach that's been developed in France by Professor Ribeiro to the English-speaking world. And that's not just a question of translating it, because the way we do psychology and clinical work here in the UK is different to in France and is different in the States, different regulated, different dynamics of freedom for the psychologists and practitioners. So that will require some support. And then we want to do research. My colleague, Dr. Daniel Stubbings, has done some really interesting research recently about the correlation, or rather lack of correlation, between UAP sightings and personality types. If people were making up UAP sightings, one might expect there to be a correlation between neuroticism as one of the big five and sightings. But no, there's a sort of equal dynamic between the big five personality types, which suggests it's not about the person, it's about the experience.
Right.
So we need to do more research, and we need to get to produce those protocols and those guidance so that the likes of Daniel Stubbings can do clinical consultation, which we'd be really pleased to do. We'd love to start being able to see patients, but we can't do that until the guidance is in place and we've got the necessary cover, insurance, and other things that you need before you do actual clinical work.
Well, it's so interesting, John, that big picture, the biggest priority is really to get the governments to admit that this is real. And what we're discovering in the United States is even when they do, it's still not so easy, because the same forces that were opposing the government doing it for the last 80 years have not melted away. They continue to operate and obfuscate. But, I think the corollary in the mental health field is the DSM. That if the category does not exist in this lexicon used by government, medical practitioners, the pharmaceutical industry, if it doesn't exist in the DSM, then it kind of doesn't exist. So getting those categories of exceptional experience or UAP experience or whatever into the lexicon would take the whole project a much farther way down the road.
Very well put. The one caveat I have to that is I go back to the fact that most people who have exceptional experiences aren't mentally ill. So finding a category in a DSM, we don't want to regard, and it's one of the challenges of your healthcare system. In order for the consultation to be paid for, the practitioner needs to find something in the DSM that he or she can tick in the box. Exactly. So that's a challenge, and there are things that are beyond my pay grade. I'm not sure how to fix that one.
Yeah. Is there an equivalent to the DSM in Britain?
The European one is, I think it's ICM, which I think we're on ICM 12 at the moment. So we have a different. Our clinical psychiatrist, who's part of our team, will be able to give chapter and verse, and we've managed to find a couple of things in there that sort of relate. Is it post-traumatic stress, something to do with that? Is it something to do with anxiety? So we can find a couple of things that an exceptional experience might be linked to in there. I think we want to push in time for something in ICM that relates to exceptional experiences, with the caveat that I've just mentioned. And I say again, the great work that Ted Rowe and the team at UAP Med are doing around this topic in the States, we're working closely with them, and they have some plans afoot to try and get exceptional experiences or anomalous experiences, whatever the term of art comes to be. We've chosen exceptional experiences because that's what Professor Thomas Rebeyron is using. They're doing some great work to push that debate forward.
Fantastic. That's one of the challenges, but also one of the extraordinary opportunities is that language is morphing right in front of our eyes, from UFO to UAP, exceptional, anomalous, ETs, NHI, biologics, as this new phenomenon emerges in human consciousness, we're all struggling with how do you actually describe it in language? And we'll probably go a few more years before people settled in to a new common lexicon for this extraordinarily diverse but compelling experience.
Very much so. And what we're grappling with is the stigma that attaches itself to those old words. But at some point, you have to confront the fact, no matter how you change the name, you have to confront the fact that we're talking about the greatest revelation in human history, the existence of aliens, non-human intelligence. And in a sense, whatever you call it, it's still that thing, the most profound revelation in human history. And some people will look at that and that'll be too much and they'll back away. We're looking for those brave men and women in positions of responsibility, MPs, who are prepared to step forward, ask the right questions, and move us to the next level in terms of scrutiny of government around health and people, as well as the military and scientific side.
Yeah. Well, John, thank you so much for your deep passion around this issue and your extraordinary precision of mind, I would say, in how you're understanding it and the priorities that you're setting. It's very, very inspiring. And you're absolutely right. This is the moment. This may be the most consequential moment in all of human history. And we're right there at the beginning as pioneers and as midwives and as catalysts for a growing understanding that we are not alone, and that the historic opportunity here is to understand this new phenomenon by whatever word we want to use, and begin to seriously come to terms with the kind of transformation within humanity that needs to occur so that we're worthy of this ET moment and can take full advantage of the opportunities inherent in this. So thank you very, very much for everything that you're doing. And of course, everyone, the New Paradigm Institute is working with uNHIdden, and we're in the process of really prioritizing, largely because of the conversations with John, the mental health aspects, because oftentimes we get caught up in the technology, reverse engineering of an alien craft, and we don't tend to pay attention to the suffering and trauma of people who've had these experiences, been ostracized, and then labeled mentally ill. So the New Paradigm Institute is very much on a pathway of inquiry as to how we can be supportive of what John and his colleagues are doing there in the UK, and amplify it and support it more globally. So thank you so much, John. Any final words that you'd like to leave with our audience?
Well, thank you very much for having me. I think what's really important and what's happening now with organizations like uNHIdden and the New Paradigm Institute is we're building effective teams. I think there's been a lot of fragmentation in the UAP world, and now we're building teams, and nothing in this world will happen without an effective team. So I commend what you and your team are doing, and I think we're building a great team at uNHIdden, and together, who knows where we can go. Yeah.
So, well, thank you. So that'll bring us to a close, everyone. John is happy to stay for a little bit in the after chat. You'll see the link in the chat box. You received the link in your Zoom reminders for today's call. And then tomorrow, we're going to hear from Otto Scharmer, professor of organizational management at MIT, who's one of the founders of the U theory movement, founder of the Presency Institute, who will contemplate with us from his perspective of how trauma and crisis leads almost inevitably, if you persevere long enough, to liberation and transformation. So that's tomorrow on Humanity Rising, Otto Scharmer. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, John. Bye for now.
Thank you, Jim.